I grew up with David Scott, the boy next door who had been my so-called childhood friend, though. In truth, he was more like a thorn lodged beneath my skin. By middle school, he was already chasing after girls, sneaking around behind the teacher's back. And I, of course, was the one he shoved into the hallway to act as lookout, while he whispered promises to whatever girl had caught his eye that week. By high school, he grew bolder, using my name as a convenient excuse to invite some pretty straight-A girl over to his house under the pretense of a study session. The two of them would disappear into his bedroom while I sat in the living room with the television buzzing, pretending not to hear their laughter. Then came college, and for the first time in years, our lives moved in different directions. I left for Tempe while he stayed in another city, and for 3 whole years, we had no contact. I thought time and distance would soften the bitterness I carried, but the first time we met again in the Phoenix Amtrak station, I realized the past was waiting for me like a shadow. He walked straight up, sliding in between me and my roommate, Faith Sullivan, as though he owned the space around us, flashing that crooked grin that had fooled too many girls before. His voice was honeyed, playful, shameless. "Hey, can I get your contact?" he asked, lifting his phone toward me. "Don't take it the wrong way. I'm just traveling through a tourist, really a little lost and looking for someone to hang out with." I almost laughed out loud. A tourist. That was his latest excuse. I knew very well he was born and raised right here in Mesa. Pretending to be some wandering stranger was just another trick in his old playbook, a way to lower someone's guard, and he had the audacity to perform it on me as though I were a fool who had forgotten every lie he ever told. His smile was bright, his posture confident, but behind that sunlit facade, I could see the same old deceit dripping from every word. 3 years apart, and David Scott had not changed one bit. His methods were still as cheap and pathetic as ever. I had no interest in playing his games, so I brushed past him, tugging my suitcase along, and called out to Faith, who was standing frozen a few steps away, with her eyes glued to his face. "Come on, the driver is here," I told her firmly. Faith startled like someone waking from a dream. Her cheeks flamed red as she nodded quickly, stumbling closer to me. But I noticed the way she kept stealing glances at him from under her lashes, brushing her hair back again and again, desperate for him to notice. He did, of course. David always noticed when a girl looked at him that way. He tilted his head, lips curving in that half smile, then deliberately turned back toward me before holding his phone out once more. Not to me this time, but to her. "Make sure you two call me whenever you go out," he said cheerfully. Faith's face lit up like the desert sky at dawn. She beamed as she lifted her phone to scan his code, unable to hide the delight spilling from her expression. "That sounds perfect," she chirped. "I'm new here too, so we can all hang out together." David's smile widened, satisfied with the way she so easily stepped into his rhythm. "Three's always better than 2, he said lightly. "Let me make a group chat for us." With a few quick taps, he added. Faith then looked back expectantly until she awkwardly added me in as well. I stood motionless, expression blank, my silence heavy enough to chill the air between us. Faith glanced at me, then at him, her lips pressing together before she finally managed to mumble out the words that had been hanging between us like a blade. "Chloe isn't really a tourist," she admitted in a thin voice. "She doesn't like going out much. Maybe it's better if just the 2 of us go." The moment the words left her mouth, I felt my stomach twist. Faith was willing to push me aside that quickly. David dropped his gaze, his grin slipping into something sharper, cooler. A smile that did not reach his eyes. He neither agreed nor refused, but the warmth he had been showing her evaporated like water on hot pavement. She tried again and again to keep the conversation alive, as we left the station, chattering about her family, about school, about anything she could think of. But he responded with short, disinterested words, his tone flat, his attention wandering. Faith did not seem to notice, or maybe she did, and chose to ignore it because rejection only made her chase harder. The more he pulled away, the more she leaned in. By the time we reached the parking lot, she had spilled half her life story, even mentioning our dorm at Arizona State University. That was the first time David's brows lifted with a flicker of interest. My sister goes there too, he said suddenly. Environmental studies, I think. The words hit me like a splash of cold water, though he spoke them casually, almost lazily. Faith gasped with excitement before I could open my mouth. Really? That's such a coincidence. We're in the same program. What's her name? Maybe I know her. His answer was smooth, practiced, almost gentle. Anderson, Chloe Anderson. Faith stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes widened as she stared at him, then at me, then back again, as though her mind could not quite connect the pieces. What did you say? She asked faintly. He smiled again, softer this time, repeating the name as though savoring it. Chloe Anderson, that's her name. Wonder if she'll be coming home to Mesa this summer. As he spoke, he was already pulling out his phone, fingers tapping quickly. And then before I could stop him, he dialed my number. The device in my bag buzzed screen, lighting up with his name. I did not answer. Instead, I pressed the silent button, slipping it back without a word. Faith glanced between us, confusion clouding her expression, while David's smirk deepened with something dangerously close to satisfaction. I checked my watch, forcing my tone into something cool, detached, final. It was time to go home, time to remind myself not to fall into the same trap again, time to remember that the boy I once knew was nothing more than a memory I had already outgrown. By the time the train pulled out and the city lights blurred behind me, I told myself I had no patience left to play the game of exes and new flings. My mother would be home in Mesa, probably stirring a pot on the stove, and the thought of that simple warmth pulled me farther away from the circus of David Scott and Faith Sullivan. I tugged my suitcase, never once looking back, and tossed over my shoulder that I was in a hurry, that he could find his own ride, that I was leaving first. Faith's hesitation lasted barely a second before she nodded quickly, almost too quickly, like someone terrified I might change my mind. Go, go, she said, her voice breathless. I'll see you later. The way her eyes lit up betrayed everything. She wanted me out of the picture, hungry for a chance to linger beside David alone. I saw straight through her small schemes, but could not find the energy to expose them. I offered a faint nod and left. From the back seat of the Uber, through the tinted window, I caught a final glimpse of Faith pulling David to the side. Her face alight, words tumbling from her lips as she leaned toward him. She was almost glowing with excitement, mouth moving endlessly while he frowned, his expression painted with boredom. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, scrolling with studied indifference while she poured herself out. The car rolled forward and I finally turned away, weary, unwilling to waste another glance. Then my own phone buzzed. A text from David. Didn't pick up my call. Still mad at me, my lips pressed into a line as I read it. I had no intention of answering. The last time we truly spoke face to face was in high school, and the years since had only stretched the distance wider. Childhood, however, had bound us like vines twined too tightly to cut clean. We were neighbors, 2 houses opposite one another in suburban Mesa. We bathed in the same kiddie pool, as toddlers shared sleepovers in blanket forts, played in the dirt until the sun bled orange. Yet beneath those memories was constant friction. We were opposites who sparked only sparks of irritation. He once peed into my water cup as a prank and watched with glee as I drank. I snapped his prized Batman figurine in retaliation and let his pet turtle loose in the canal behind our street. We never knew peace, always towing the line between playmates and enemies. By 6th grade, when hormones simmered, he clasped the hand of a girl during a break in class. I saw it, raised my arm, and shouted to the teacher that David Scott was harassing her, that our exercise routine had no hand-holding. The classroom froze, then erupted. The teacher dragged him into the office, and the shame that followed clung to him like smoke. He was nearly suspended. Parents called in his name, whispered with laughter in every hallway. He came back glaring at me, teeth clenched, voice low with fury, spitting my name like venom. Chloe Anderson, do you want to die? I stared him down without a shred of fear, slammed my palm against his desk so hard his pens and books flew into the air. "Say that again," I challenged. At that time, acne dotted my cheeks, and the medication I was prescribed had swollen me to nearly twice his size. One sharp shout from me was enough to make him flinch back, retreating 2 steps, as color flooded his face. He wanted to argue, I could see it burning in his eyes, but cowardice chained his tongue. He swallowed his rage and fell silent. After that, he avoided me, barely speaking for an entire semester. By middle school, his attention drifted to another girl. He buzzed around her like a persistent fly, buying her breakfast in the mornings, sneaking bubble tea into the cafeteria at lunch, slipping candies and trinkets into her desk. By the second semester, persistence turned to success. He had won her heart. The day he confessed, flushed with victory, leaning close to seal their first kiss, I stood nearby and calmly raised my phone. I recorded the moment in full detail, perfect lighting every angle. Later, I whispered that the footage might find its way to his father, who would be furious enough to make him taste leather belts and wooden hangers. His face drained, white panic crowding his features. "Don't tell him," he begged. "I'll pay you." $50 he offered. I smirked. "Every week," I said. "50, or your little secret goes public." His eyes bulged. "Are you insane, Chloe? Why not just rob me outright?" I folded my arms, savoring the upper hand. "You get $100 a week allowance. I'm only taking half. Unless you think your love life is worth less than $50. He clenched his jaw, cast a glance at the girl behind him, who watched with confused eyes, and finally surrendered. From then on, every Friday without fail, he handed me cash to preserve his innocent image. I became his reluctant confidant, even guarding their stolen kisses during recess, while standing watch outside the classroom door. By high school, his boldness grew. He borrowed my name to lure another well-behaved girl into his home under the guise of group study. They whispered in his room while I sat in the living room flipping channels. I thought the cycle would never end, that this was who we were destined to be until senior year's graduation party. David had just turned 18, hormones boiling, fantasies swirling of sharing his first night with the girl he believed he loved. He hid his plans from everyone, careful, meticulous, renting a room at a motel on the edge of town. But fate is cruel. The moment he guided her shyly toward the door, my mother of all people happened to spot them. Alarmed, she called his parents, and what followed was chaos. He was dragged home in shame, his first dream shattered before it began. The beating that night was legendary, the kind that left welts and broken hangers scattered on the floor. At dawn, when I was still tangled in sleep, fists thundered against my front door. I stumbled out, rubbing my eyes, and the instant I cracked it open, his hand lashed across my face. The slap was violent, the sting searing, and for a second the world spun sideways. "You crazy pig," he roared, his eyes bloodshot, veins pulsing. "Snitch. You'll die alone. No one will ever love you. You're just a disgusting pig who ruins everything." His words sliced deeper than the blow itself. I remember clutching my burning cheek, staring at him in disbelief, hearing the hatred laced into every syllable. The boy who had grown up across from me, the one who had shared my childhood, looked at me like I was filth. That image burned itself into me, carved there so sharply that even 3 years later, when he smiled at me in the station as though nothing had ever happened, I could still hear the echo of his voice calling me a pig. Fate can be cruel, and David learned that lesson the night he tried to make his teenage dream come true. He had led his girlfriend with trembling hands toward the door of a shabby motel on the outskirts of Mesa, his pulse racing with anticipation. He thought the world had finally aligned for him, that no one would notice, that he would slip quietly into adulthood with a story he could keep secret. But fate placed my mother there at that exact moment. She happened to be driving by, saw him, and called his parents without hesitation. The dream crumbled before it even began. He was dragged home that night, and the beating he received echoed through the neighborhood. Wooden hangers snapped in two, the air filled with shouting, his pride broken as thoroughly as the hook of a belt. The next morning, while I was still curled under my blanket, Half asleep, someone pounded on our front door. I shuffled out groggy, rubbing my eyes, and as soon as I cracked the door open, his hand whipped across my face. The slap was vicious, the sting exploding across my cheek until my head spun and my knees nearly gave out. "David, are you insane?" I gasped, clutching my burning face. His eyes were bloodshot veins bulging at his temple, fury spilling out of every line of his body. "You pig," he shouted, his voice raw. "You snitch. Why don't you just die already? I knew it. You're in love with me. That's why you ruin everything. No one will ever love you. You'll die alone, you disgusting pig." His words hit harder than his hand. I can still see it even 3 years later, that look of loathing on his face, the way his hatred sliced through me without hesitation. At the time, I was too stunned, too dazed from sleep to react, too slow to give him the slap he deserved. Even now, I still feel the anger simmering when I think about it. And then not long ago, there he was again, smiling brightly, as if none of it had ever happened, acting as though the years had erased his cruelty. I found it almost laughable. Of course, he did not recognize me at first glance. 3 years had reshaped me. The weight I once carried was gone. The acne faded, my face sharper, my body stronger. To him, I was just another stranger, someone new he could toy with. I had no interest in revealing myself. Trouble was not something I invited anymore. Just as I decided to ignore him, my phone buzzed with another message from him, the third of the day. By the way, it read, "Do you know this girl in your program? She's gorgeous." Attached were photos. My thumb hovered over the screen, ready to close it, but then the images loaded and my chest tightened. It was me, my dorm room in Tempe, my damp hair wrapped in a towel after a shower, my shoulders bare. The angle made my stomach twist. Someone had taken those pictures secretly. There was only one person who could have done it, my roommate, Faith Sullivan. Before I could gather my fury into words, another text from David appeared. "She must be in your department, right? Help me get close to her. Name your price." My grip on the phone trembled. Rage roared in my chest, but I forced myself not to explode, not to scream into the chat, where he would see how deeply he had hit me. Instead, I switched to Faith's thread, my fingers shaking as I prepared to confront her. But she beat me to it. "Hey babe," she typed, breezy, careless. "Let's go to the water park tomorrow." My throat closed. The words jammed against my teeth. I wanted to demand why she betrayed me, why she dared cross a line that should never be crossed. I wanted to turn the car around, march back to the station, and slap her until my palm burned. But before I could send anything, another message popped up. She was online. "Please," she added just once. "Think of it as payback for when I rushed you to the hospital that night you collapsed. You owe me." And there it was, the trap. Faith had done something good once, something I could never erase. When I first moved into the ASU dorms, I had been struck with blinding pain from appendicitis. She happened to stumble in from a night out, saw me doubled over, and called the ambulance in time. Without her, I might not have made it. It was the one moment she held over me, the one debt I could never deny. My anger collapsed into a sigh, heavy and bitter. She knew exactly how to play me. After a long pause, I typed a single word. "Fine." Almost immediately, she replied, too cheerful, too smug. "Great. Oh, and David will be there too. Don't wear anything too cute, okay?" I tightened my grip around the phone until my knuckles ached. I hurled the device onto my bed and turned away, teeth clenched. The next day, I arrived at Golfland Sunsplash an hour early, determined to avoid them to keep my distance. I tucked myself into a corner, scrolling through my phone, pretending not to exist. For 30 minutes, the sun beat down, children squealed in the pools, and I thought maybe I could survive the day invisible. Then a shadow fell across me. I lifted my head slowly, and there he was, David Scott, smiling as though the world revolved around him. His eyes caught mine, and in that instant I felt bile rise in my throat. I turned away quickly, inhaling deeply, forcing down the wave of nausea. I had known him nearly 18 years. I knew every dirty trick hidden beneath that charming face, every cruelty concealed in those warm brown eyes. But he mistook my reaction for shyness, his smile widening, his confidence blooming. He held out a cold bottle of water, condensation dripping as if offering kindness. "Here, drink," he said softly, his voice smooth, harmless. I stared at the bottle and shook my head. "No, I have my own." His brow lifted for a fraction of a second, but instead of snapping, he simply tucked the bottle back into his bag, grin intact, as if rejection meant nothing. So he continued, easily leaning closer. "Let's talk." David tilted his head, watching me with a spark of amusement, as if he had stumbled upon a private joke. "I heard from your roommate that your name is Chloe Anderson, right?" The words froze me mid-gesture. My fingers suspended above my phone. Before I could reply, he pressed on, his grin widening. "Funny coincidence. You share the same name as someone I used to know, but the two of you are nothing alike. In fact, you're so different it's impossible to even compare." Something inside me twisted. I slipped my phone into my bag, lifted my eyes, and with the faintest smile whispered, "Tell me more." His expression lit up like a child finally handed his favorite toy. He stepped back, giving himself space to study me from head to toe, his gaze deliberate, his amusement growing. Then with exaggerated seriousness, he shaped his arms into a wide circle and declared, "She was round like a barrel, twice your size. Her hands were bigger than your entire arm." And before I could stop him, he grabbed my wrist, holding it up as though proving his point with a side-by-side comparison. My brows knitted. Discomfort prickled at my skin. And I jerked slightly, but he released me on his own, feigning innocence, his lips quirking upward. "What's wrong? Nothing at all." He said it like he hadn't just pried into my past, like the sting of his words meant nothing. I lowered my gaze to my wrist, quiet, my silence a shield. But deep down, I knew. He had not spoken idly. It was a test. That was his old game, the one he had played since adolescence: poke, prod, insult, then watch. If I reacted too strongly, he would retreat, but if I stayed quiet, he would push further, taking another step into ground he had no right to claim. That was his entire strategy with women: bait them, test them, gauge them. The years had not changed him at all. I let a cold laugh curl in my chest, refusing to give him what he wanted. He went on anyway, eager, his voice rising with the thrill of telling stories that painted him as the tolerant one. He spoke of this girl as if she had been some monstrous version of me, describing her as ugly, fat, temperamental, unbearable. He placed himself as the long-suffering saint, the kind, brotherly figure who had put up with her cruelty. His teeth clenched as he spat one memory in particular, swearing she had pushed him down a staircase, leaving him with a fractured bone and weeks in the hospital. My lips pressed together as the memory flashed behind my eyes. I remembered the scene differently. I remembered him taking my toothbrush, my towel, and scrubbing the bathroom floor with them, smirking as though it was the funniest prank in the world. The push had not come out of nowhere, but I stayed still, my hands folded neatly, my face calm as stone. If he wanted to speak, I would let him. If he wanted to dig his own grave with exaggerations, I would watch. It almost fascinated me seeing how far he would go, how pitifully he tried to reinvent our past. His words grew sharper, his voice more animated, until a sudden shadow fell over us. Faith Sullivan had arrived. Her eyes flicked from him to me, then back again, her face darkening as she took in the scene of us talking alone. She forced a smile, the corners of her lips trembling, and stepped forward, quickly looping her arm through mine, with more force than affection. "What are you two talking about?" she asked lightly. Though her grip on me tightened, yanking me backward, I stumbled, losing my footing, landing hard on the pavement with a cry as pain shot up my ankle. For a heartbeat, Faith's lips twitched upward in something dangerously close to satisfaction. But before she could revel in it, David crouched in front of me, alarm flashing across his face. "Are you hurt?" His eyes darted to my ankle, swelling, already blooming beneath the skin. He reached out instinctively, his hand hovering as he spoke quickly. "I'll carry you to a seat. Come on, let me help." "No," I said firmly, straightening myself despite the pain. At the same time, Faith's voice pitched high and sharp. No, don't. Both of us had spoken at once. His gaze flicked between us, confusion shadowing his expression. Faith quickly shoved herself into the gap, pushing him aside as she bent to help me up, plastering a grin across her face. Chloe doesn't like strangers touching her, right, Chloe? Her eyes locked onto mine, desperate, pleading with me to agree to play along to protect her performance. For a long moment, I held her gaze, then finally murmured a small sound of assent. David froze, clearly disappointed but unwilling to argue further. He stepped back reluctantly, though his eyes lingered on my ankle, his frown deepening. With that injury, you can't go in the water, he muttered. We should do something else. Of course not. Faith burst out, panic flaring in her voice. We came all this way, we're not going to waste it. He opened his mouth again, concern etched across his features, but she shot me a glance full of signals, her lashes fluttering, her expression screaming at me to cooperate. Besides, she said quickly, Chloe told me herself she wanted to swim. She wouldn't have agreed to come otherwise. Her eyes darted to mine again, insistence burning. Isn't that right, Chloe? He frowned, waiting, and I sat there caught between them, my ankle throbbing, my chest heavy. Faith's hand squeezed my arm hard enough to bruise her nails, biting into my skin. The message loud and clear, agree or else. I inhaled slowly, let the breath leak out, and whispered the single word she demanded. Yes. Relief washed across her face instantly. She beamed triumphant, turning to David with satisfaction glittering in her eyes. He studied me for another long moment, suspicion clouding his gaze, but finally he nodded, though the tightness in his jaw betrayed his unease. Faith clapped her hands, her laughter ringing too brightly. She had gotten what she wanted, the illusion of control, the opportunity to press forward with her schemes. But what she did not realize was that beneath my silence, beneath the mask of agreement, my patience was fraying, thinning with every breath. One more tug, one more betrayal, and it would snap. I kept my silence, the ache in my ankle pulsing with every slight movement, a dull reminder of the fall Faith had engineered. She clung to my arm with a grip that felt less like comfort and more like ownership. Her eyes wide, shimmering with desperate hope. I understood it clearly now. To her, my pain was irrelevant. I was nothing more than a lure bait to keep David Scott close. My worth in her eyes was measured only by how useful I could be in drawing his attention. That realization sank deep into me, heavier than the throbbing in my leg. When I failed to answer quickly enough, Faith pinched hard at my side, her nails digging into the soft skin of my waist until I flinched. Her whisper was sharp, urgent. Say something, Chloe. Don't just stand there. I lifted my gaze slowly, met her eager face, and finally let out a single word, soft as a sigh. Fine. Relief crashed over her like a wave. Her smile bloomed, her shoulders loosened, and she straightened proudly, turning her gleaming eyes toward David as if she had won some private battle. He scratched the bridge of his nose, muttered something under his breath, and without another glance at either of us, walked toward the ticket booth. The moment he disappeared from sight, I yanked my arm free from Faith's hold. She blinked at me, startled, her lips parting as if to speak, but I stared straight at her, my voice calm, cold, final. This is the last time I endure any of your schemes out of debt. After this, I don't owe you anything. After this, I will not stay quiet. The words hit her harder than any slap. She froze, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. For once, she had nothing to say. By the time David returned with the tickets, she had rearranged her face into something neutral, her silence louder than her usual chatter. When the three of us entered Golfland Sunsplash together, she didn't reach for my arm again. She didn't act like my best friend or play the part of a doting roommate. Instead, she stuck herself to David's side, practically glued to him. And when he peeled off his shirt to reveal a body honed and firm from years of basketball and weight training, her restraint snapped. Her eyes sparkled, her breath hitched audibly, and she let out a little gasp that drew the attention of people nearby. "Oh my God," she squealed, circling him with a look of wonder. "Your abs are insane. How do you train like that?" She reached out, then hesitated. her hand hovering uncertainly until he chuckled. With practiced ease, he caught her wrist and pressed her palm against his stomach. "Go ahead," he said lightly. "See for yourself." Faith blushed crimson, her fingers splayed over the hard ridges of muscle, her face practically glowing with infatuation. I watched from a step away, arms crossed unmoved. The very sight of his smirk made my stomach twist, but what came next made my blood cool further. David turned his head toward me, his eyes searching, lingering, daring. "Want to feel too?" The casual arrogance in his tone made it sound like an invitation he assumed no one would refuse. My expression didn't change. Without a word, I took 2 measured steps back, slipping neatly out of his reach, making it clear with action alone that I had no desire to touch him. The slight lift of my chin told him everything. I wasn't impressed, I wasn't flustered, and I certainly wasn't one of his conquests. He blinked, brows twitching, and for a moment his smile faltered. David Scott wasn't used to being ignored. I could feel his gaze on me after that heavy probing, as if my rejection had stoked a new kind of interest. The more I slipped away, the more determined he seemed to follow. Even while Faith chattered beside him, laughing too loudly at his half-hearted jokes, his head tilted toward me, his eyes drawn in my direction. His words crafted to pull me into the conversation. "Chloe, you like American movies, right?" he asked suddenly. Faith jumped to respond, laughing with forced brightness. "That's me, I love them." But his gaze stayed locked on mine. "How about Korean dramas then, or anime? Which one do you watch?" Faith's smile faltered, the color draining from her cheeks. Her hands clenched into fists, knuckles whitening, but she didn't dare interrupt again. I gave him nothing. No answer, no acknowledgement. My silence only seemed to thrill him more. He fell into step beside me, lowering his voice, as though sharing some secret meant only for me, his grin playful, almost boyish. I slowed my pace, deliberately testing him. He slowed too. I drifted behind, trying to lose myself in the press of the crowd. He found me, his shadow stretching across mine. Our eyes collided and he flashed me a grin so bright it could have lit the desert sky. That look, that persistence was enough to make his intentions undeniable. He was chasing me now, not her. My ankle throbbed with each step, limiting me, reminding me that even if I wanted to escape, I couldn't run far. Faith, oblivious to my pain, dragged us toward the most dangerous rides, eyes glinting with excitement for the biggest slides and wildest drops. "You two go ahead," I told her finally, my voice even masking the ache in my leg. "I'll sit here and wait." I lowered myself onto a bench, gesturing for them to continue without me. Faith opened her mouth instantly, ready to agree, ready to abandon me in an instant, but David spoke first. "No way, we're not leaving you behind. That would be wrong." His voice was firm, unyielding, and he dropped into the seat beside me. Faith's face twitched. She tried to argue, but the protest never left her lips. The chance to go alone with him had been stolen. Her smile slipped into something brittle, her eyes flashing with unspoken fury, but she swallowed it down. In the end, the 3 of us wandered the park together, aimlessly circling pools and slides without trying a single ride. The tension was a living thing between us, growing heavier with every step. Faith's forced laughter rang hollow. David's gaze kept straying toward me, too obvious, too deliberate. And I walked silently, each step echoing with the knowledge that the fragile balance between us was about to shatter. Faith's face grew darker the longer we wandered, her smile slipping into something brittle, every laugh sounding more forced than the last. By the time we passed the lazy river attraction, David's eyes lit up, the spark of a plan igniting. "Let's try this one," he suggested, his voice bright. "It won't hurt your ankle, Chloe, and it's not too wild. Perfect for you." Faith's entire demeanor changed in an instant. "Really? Finally? I've been dying to get in the water." She squealed, her voice high with excitement. Just hearing him say her name once was enough to make her glow like she had been crowned queen of the park. She nodded quickly, grinning ear to ear. "Yes, let's do it," I sighed quietly, resignation weighing me down. In the end, I nodded too. Great Faith cheered, rushing ahead to the line to grab inner tubes. David followed, striding with purpose, selecting one of the larger floats and carrying it back toward me. I opened my mouth to refuse, but he was already there, insistent. Don't say no. The others are filthy. This one's clean. I wiped it myself. He slipped it around me before I could resist, securing it in place with a strange tenderness. When I finally relented, he leaned down, lowering his voice until his breath brushed my ear. Don't worry. I'll hold on to you the whole time. You won't drift off. If you feel tired, just tug my hand. I'll bring you back to shore. His tone was soft, reassuring, almost too gentle, and for a moment I had to fight the urge to roll my eyes. I wanted to tell him I could swim perfectly well, that the water wasn't even deep enough to justify his promise. But I didn't bother. Explaining would be wasted energy. If he wanted to play the part of protector, let him. Sure, I said lightly, offering the bare minimum of politeness. Satisfied, he guided me forward, his hands steady on the float as we stepped into the shallow pool. Even once we were in the water, he kept hold of my tube, his eyes constantly flicking to mine. Every time our gazes collided, he smiled faintly. Lips curving, eyes softening into crescents that almost looked warm. If another rider's float bumped into mine, even slightly, David stiffened, scowled, and shoved them away with sharp force, his body angled protectively. His instinctive favoritism was impossible to miss. It was the kind of attention that could make someone's heart stir, especially when paired with a face as handsome as his. A smile that seemed to carry heat in it. Anyone else might have melted under that look, but I knew better. I knew too well what lay beneath. He could play the charming savior all he wanted. I would never forget the venom in his voice when he called me a pig. I let myself drift with the current mind-blank gaze, fixed ahead, ignoring both of them. Behind me, Faith trailed 2 steps back. Her expression hollow, her eyes locked on my back with something sharp and dangerous. I didn't notice her until I felt it. A sudden tug at my leg. At first I thought my swimsuit had caught on something beneath the water, maybe the edge of a grate. But then the pull grew stronger, yanking hard, dragging me down. My entire body plunged under the float, slipping away, my mouth flooding with chlorinated water before I could gasp. My lungs burned, panic flaring. Instinct fought through the haze, and I kicked upward, breaking the surface long enough to gulp air, choking as I sputtered. Relief was fleeting. Another yank wrapped around my ankle, harder this time, and I was pulled under again. My eyes flew open against the sting of chlorine, and there, blurred but unmistakable, was Faith Sullivan's face, twisted into something cruel and unrecognizable. She was the one dragging me down. For a heartbeat, my mind refused to believe it. She had stolen my photos, betrayed my trust, manipulated me into coming here. But this was a step beyond anything I had imagined. She was trying to drown me. The bubbles rushed from my mouth as I fought against her grip, disbelief warring with fury. I had told myself I was being generous, forgiving her too many times. She had sent private pictures of me to David, and I had stayed silent. She had used me as bait to get close to him, and I had swallowed my pride. All afternoon I had deliberately kept my distance, lowering my presence so she could shine, thinking it would ease her jealousy, but in her eyes my very existence was too much. I had never been anything more than a thorn lodged in her side, a reminder she couldn't ignore. The realization made something dark twist in me, even as the water closed over my head. My lips curved, faintly bitter amusement flickering despite the burning in my chest. If this was what she wanted, then I would show her exactly how wrong she was. With deliberate calm, I lifted my hand beneath the water, making a single clear gesture. She frowned in confusion, her grip slackening for a second, not understanding the signal. That moment was all I needed. I lashed out without hesitation, my leg cutting through the water as I kicked Faith squarely in the face. Her eyes widened and shock bubbles streaming from her mouth as the realization struck her. My message was clear. You picked the wrong person to drown. Fury boiled through me as I lunged forward, shoving her down, my fist connecting with her cheek, under the resistance of water. She thrashed wildly, clawing for the surface, but the moment her head broke above the current and she opened her mouth to scream, I pressed my hand hard against her shoulder and forced her back under. Her panic exploded limbs, jerking muffled cries, dissolving into frantic bursts of bubbles. "Don't, Chloe, please don't, you're killing me," she sputtered between coughs, when I allowed her a fleeting breath. "I was just playing, I swear." Her excuses only ignited the blaze inside me. My lips curled into a cold smile. Without a word, I shoved her under again, then yanked her up, then pushed her down once more over and over until she was coughing so hard her face had turned a ghastly shade of white. Finally, when her chest heaved and her eyes glazed with terror, I let her go. "So you do understand what it feels like to die?" I hissed, my voice cutting through her sputters. "If I didn't know how to swim, I'd already be at the bottom of this pool because of you." Her stunned expression confirmed it. The thought of killing me had crossed her mind. Rage flared fresh, and before I could stop myself, my palm cracked across her cheek, the sound sharp even over the splash of water. A high-pitched scream pierced the air, startling me, but it hadn't come from Faith. My head snapped toward the sound and my heart dropped. A body floated nearby, half-submerged limbs slack. His bare chest gleamed pale under the sun, his head tilted dangerously. It was David. He was unconscious, drifting like a broken doll. My gut twisted with horror. No lifeguard had noticed. We were in a blind corner of the pool. Without thinking, I surged through the water, reaching him just as his body began to sink. "David, wake up." My hand slapped lightly against his cheeks, but his face remained pale, lips bluish, his body limp in my arms. Panic clawed at me as I checked for breath, for a pulse. Both were weak, barely there. My chest tightened. He had been under too long. "Come on, stay with me," I whispered hoarsely as I fought to tow him toward the edge. Faith, shaken from her coughing fit, noticed at last and swam over frantically, eyes wide with dread. "It's David," she gasped, suddenly full of energy. "Oh my God, it's David." Together we dragged him onto the concrete. His skin was cold, his chest unmoving. A rush of fear thundered in my ears. There was no time to think. "Go get help," I barked at Faith. "I'll start CPR." She nodded automatically, then froze her gaze, flicking down to David's lips. "Wait, you're going to do mouth-to-mouth. Maybe I should do it instead." She stammered, her voice trembling, but her eyes glinting with something grotesquely eager. For a moment, I couldn't even believe what I was hearing. David was seconds from death, and she was worried about who would touch his mouth first. "Fine, you do it," I snapped, shoving her aside in frustration. I spun, ready to sprint toward the nearest lifeguard stand, but her voice rang out behind me again, high-pitched and whiny. "Chloe, wait, I don't remember how to do the chest compressions. Show me first." I turned back in disbelief, rage erupting. Her expression was almost innocent, but it only made me sicker. She wasn't trying to save him, she was stalling, turning this into some twisted fantasy. My blood roared in my ears. I lunged forward, kicking her hard in the stomach, sending her sprawling back into the water. "Get out of my way," I roared. Dropping to my knees beside David, I pressed my palms over his chest and began compressions, my arms steady, though my body shook with fury. "You waste one more second and he's gone, Faith. Do you even realize that?" She bobbed nearby, coughing, staring at me with wide eyes, but I ignored her. My focus was on the rhythmic press of my hands against David's chest, the desperate prayers spilling through my mind. "Please breathe, please come back." 1 minute crawled by, then 2. Just as despair began to claw its way into me, lifeguards rushed to our side, their whistles shrieking as they dropped to the ground. One took over compressions, another pried my hands away, gently urging me back. I stumbled, breathless, shaking, watching helplessly as they worked in swift, practiced motions. Then with a violent cough, David sputtered, water spewing from his mouth. His chest heaved, air rushing back into his lungs. He rolled to his side, gasping, trembling, but alive. Relief flooded me so hard my knees nearly gave out. I knelt beside him, my hand hovering near his shoulder, torn between touching him and pulling away. His eyes cracked open, glazed and unfocused, but when they landed on me, something shifted. His lips parted as if to speak, but before he could, I had already pulled out my phone, my fingers dialing instinctively. My voice was steady when someone picked up on the other end. "Mrs. Scott, it's Chloe. David nearly drowned at Sunsplash. You need to come immediately." His eyes widened, disbelief flashing across his damp face. Even half-conscious, he knew. He knew exactly who I was. I lifted the phone to my ear, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "Mrs. Scott, this is Chloe. David had an accident at the water park. I think you should come right away." The moment the words left my lips, David's eyes flew open wider than before, shock flashing across them, disbelief raw and unguarded. He stared at me as if I had just ripped open the ground beneath him. "You're Chloe Anderson," he rasped, his voice hoarse, laced with horror and something close to fear. "That's not possible." I didn't bother to answer, didn't bother to confirm what he already knew. Deep down, Faith took the chance to push herself closer, practically throwing her body against his side, pretending she had been there all along. But it wasn't until his mother and my parents rushed into the hospital room that the truth fully sank into him. The realization hit him like a brick wall. I was indeed the girl who had lived across the street from him his entire childhood, the one he had mocked endlessly, the one he had once called his pig of a neighbor. He stared at me now, bewildered, searching my face for traces of the girl he used to know, his gaze dragging across every line of my features, like he expected to uncover some hidden scar or familiar flaw. Finally, his lips trembled. Did you get plastic surgery?" The question was so absurd, so pathetic, I almost laughed. Instead, I met his eyes with icy calm. "No, I just don't have to take hormone medication anymore." He froze, the weight of my words settling into him, rendering him speechless. He opened his mouth as if to pry further, but I had already stood ready to leave. "Wait," he croaked, lurching forward to sit up. The sudden movement sent him crashing sideways, collapsing off the bed with a thud. My brows furrowed. Despite myself, I bent down, sliding an arm under him to help lift his unsteady body back onto the bed. I pressed the call button for the nurse and muttered, "Calm down, stop making a scene." But he wouldn't let go. His fingers clamped around my wrist, his eyes glassy yet burning with desperate intensity. "Don't leave me. You saved me. At least give me a chance to repay you." His words spilled out in a frantic rush, half pleading, half rambling. "I know I didn't recognize you before. I know I said awful things. I was a jerk, a complete idiot. Hit me, curse me, kick me, make me crawl on the floor barking like a dog. If that's what it takes, just don't turn away from me, Chloe. Don't shut me out." His voice cracked with an almost childlike whine, and for the first time in my life, I felt the hair on my arms rise from sheer discomfort. David Scott, who had once sneered at me like I was dirt beneath his shoes, was now begging like a boy who had lost his favorite toy. My stomach turned. I tugged my wrist, but his grip was iron. No matter how hard I tried, he didn't let go. "Please," he whispered hoarsely, guiding my hand up to his cheek, pressing it there as if my touch was the only lifeline tethering him to reality. "If hitting me makes you feel better, do it. Just don't walk away." His handsome face leaned closer, so close I could feel the warmth of his breath. His expression, stripped of arrogance, filled instead with frantic sincerity, like he truly believed he deserved to be punished if it meant I'd stay. I inhaled deeply, steadying myself, and finally spoke. "When you were 13, you stole money from your father to buy gifts for your little online gaming crush. Remember that? He found out, beat you with his belt until it nearly snapped. That was me, David. I was the one who told your mom." His hand froze around mine, eyes widening with shock. Confusion swept over his face as I continued, my voice low and unwavering. "When we were in middle school, you were obsessed with that older girl at the arcade by the market. You snuck there every day, gave her jewelry you'd stolen from your mom. And when she found out she beat you with coat hangers, that wasn't an accident either, I told her too." His face drained of color, disbelief, hardening into numb silence. I pressed on almost cruelly. Most of the times you got punished, it was because of me. I told, every time. His breathing faltered, the weight of my confession smashing through his fragile pride. He looked like I had gutted him, but I didn't stop. Except for that night after high school graduation. When you tried to take your girlfriend to a motel, it wasn't me who told on you. That time your luck ran out all on its own. His head bowed, shoulders trembling, and when he finally looked up, his expression was a mess of guilt and confusion. His voice a hoarse whisper. Why are you telling me this now? Is it because of what I said that night? Do you still hate me that much? If you want, I'll apologize. I'll apologize for everything. I cut him off before the words could poison the air further. No, I don't hate you. My voice was quiet, almost pitying, but sharp enough to wound. I don't tell you this because I want an apology. I tell you this because the truth is I never cared about you. Not the way you thought. Not enough to hate, not enough to love. You were just the boy across the street. That's all. He stared, shattered, his jaw slack, his eyes searching for a lifeline that wasn't there. I let out a soft breath, freeing my wrist from his grip at last. I don't like you, David. I don't need your gratitude for saving you. If you want to repay me, just stay out of my way. Consider that enough. Saying it all out loud left me lighter, as if a burden I had carried for years had finally slipped from my shoulders. I turned ready to leave once more, but as I reached the doorway, David's voice, shaky and raw, clawed its way after me. Then why did you save me if you truly don't care? You could have just stood by and watched. His tone was edged with urgency, even trembling. I paused, my back still to him, and answered in the calmest voice I could manage. Because no matter who it is, if I am able to save someone, I will. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute, stretching behind me as I walked out of his hospital room without looking back. After he was discharged, it didn't take long for David to flaunt a new relationship. Less than 5 days after the incident at the water park, he was suddenly parading Faith Sullivan around as his girlfriend, acting as though they had shared some timeless romance, rather than a whirlwind of shallow attraction. Knowing David, it wasn't surprising. He had always been impulsive, the kind of boy who mistook infatuation for destiny. Back in high school, he once confessed to a girl he had just met 3 hours earlier. To him, feelings were a rush of adrenaline, easily ignited, easily extinguished. Still, when I saw him standing at my doorstep early one morning with Faith clinging to his arm, my stomach twisted with disbelief. Faith was holding one of David's old photo albums, snapping shots of the embarrassing childhood pictures he once treasured, but had long since hidden away. She shoved the album in front of her phone and cackled, her laughter echoing through the hall as she sneered at my past. So this was you, Chloe. You look like a pig back then. God, no wonder David never noticed you. She nearly doubled over with laughter, leaning into David's chest, seeking his approval. David's jaw tightened. For a fleeting moment, his eyes flickered toward my window, guilt crossing his face. But then he shut his eyes and wrapped his arm around Faith, lowering his head to kiss her in a show so rehearsed it made bile rise in my throat. Right there in front of my door, they kissed like teenagers starving for attention. I had toothpaste foam still lingering in my mouth. Without a word, I grabbed my phone, snapped a picture, and sent it directly to Mrs. Scott. Within 30 minutes, David's mother stormed over, her voice slicing through the quiet morning like a whip. So this is serious, is it? If it's serious, you bring her into the house properly. Standing in the hall making a scene like this? What are you trying to prove? Faith's smug expression collapsed into one of flushed embarrassment. She stammered out a greeting, a "Hello, ma'am," her voice so meek it was nearly swallowed. David's face darkened, shame flooding his features as he quickly pulled his mother inside. The moment the door shut, he yanked the album from Faith's hands. His words were clipped, his tone sharp. "Go home. I'll text you later." With that, the door slammed, leaving Faith standing pale and shaken in the hall. 2 hours later, when I stepped outside to throw out the trash, she was still there, huddled on the floor like a ghost. The instant she saw me, she scrambled up and blocked my path, her face twisted in frustration. "You must be so jealous of me, aren't you?" She blurted, her voice breaking with brittle confidence. "Sure, you saved David's life, but in the end, the one he chose was me. I shoved the trash bag into her hands without hesitation, offering her a thin smile. "Then congratulations," I said flatly. The words were simple, almost kind, but my indifference pierced her more than any insult could. She froze, the triumphant speech she had prepared dying in her throat. I moved to shut my door, but she grabbed the edge, her nails digging into the wood. "You're not jealous?" "Not even a little." Her eyes locked onto mine, desperate, almost feral. I tilted my head, genuinely puzzled. "Jealous of what exactly?" Her voice rose with frantic energy, each word spilling out in a cascade. "Jealous that I have a boyfriend as handsome as David. Jealous that even though I'm not as pretty as you, now I still get to be loved, to be chosen. Jealous that I'm the one standing next to him while you're left with nothing." It was like watching a firecracker explode, sparks of insecurity bursting in all directions. And in that moment, I understood. For all the time she smiled sweetly at me, Faith had been waging a quiet war, measuring herself against me in every possible way. Her need to parade David in front of me wasn't about love. It was about proving that she had won some invisible battle. I thought about responding, about shattering her delusion with the truth, but the weight of my own exhaustion stopped me. After a pause, I spoke with calm clarity. "I have no reason to be jealous of you. This is the life you chose, not mine. I don't waste time envying other people's choices. And if living well makes you feel like it's a competition, maybe you should see a therapist." The words remained locked in my chest, unspoken, but the sentiment burned in my eyes. What I did say aloud was simple and final. "Being chosen doesn't mean you have value." Then I shut the door, cutting off her wide-eyed stare, her open mouth, and the ugly storm of her envy. On the third day of their so-called relationship, it all crumbled. Faith stormed into David's house, tears streaking her face, her voice rising in shrill accusations. She screamed that he had slept with her and now had to take responsibility, but David, ever reckless yet evasive, refused. Their shouting match rattled through the neighborhood, nearly escalating to blows. By the time I returned home, Faith was sitting disheveled in the hall, her hair a mess, her clothes torn, her dignity in tatters. She lifted her head when she saw me, her voice hoarse and breaking. "You're laughing at me, aren't you? You must be mocking me inside." I stopped, my face unreadable, and answered with quiet truth. "Don't make this about me. Whatever happened between you and David has nothing to do with me." I walked past her and shut my door this time. With finality, the slam reverberating like a closing chapter. For once I felt peace. The chaos outside was theirs to endure, not mine. At last I had drawn a boundary that neither their foolishness nor their self-inflicted misery could cross. Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next videos.